So we're going to talk about financial awareness, and the breakdown of the presentation will be a quick introduction, an idea of budgeting and disposable income, compounding interest, credit, and important information at the end. And that information will be based off of OSAP and doing your taxes. So I like to always start these presentations with more, I guess, I'd say more generic questions about, does money buy you happiness? And I know it's a little bit cliche, but I don't think there's a right or wrong when answering this question in particular, because again, it can buy you happiness if you need the money to survive, for example, or sometimes it doesn't make that much of an impact if there's other things that bring you more happiness, for example. But one thing is true, that the decisions that you make today will affect you in the future, right? And that's something to keep in mind when you are making financial decisions, whether it's buying a car or in the future maybe getting a house, or even just investing short-term versus long-term. You really do have to think about the money that you have in your account today. That will really be important for you 5 years, 10 years down the road. All the decisions you make will be based off your priorities, and they should be based off your priorities, not other people's priorities. And that depends on you as a person, your situation, and how much risk you can tolerate. And at the end, the most important thing when it comes to money is that there is a cost to doing nothing. If you let your money sit, it will negatively impact you, and we'll get more into that as the presentation goes on. But the first things first, before we can get into investing and making money with your money or credit cards, you have to go to the basics of budgeting and savings. And maybe there's quite a bit of you who maybe have this down already, but I think it's important that we go through it. The most important aspect to budgetings and savings comes down to two factors, and that is how much you earn and how much you spend. And it's pretty, I guess, when you say it like that out loud, it's common sense. But these are the two factors that will always affect how much disposable income you have and what you can do with it. So I'm glad if you're joining us today. I'm really happy that you're here, because last year when I was working with North York Community House and helping with financial literacy, there were some pretty, I'd say, interesting stats in Canada. For example, the fact that 33% of Canadians have $0 in retirement savings funds. And that's because almost half of Canadians don't have a budget or understand how to manage a budget. And it becomes a little bit more concerning when we realize that our quality of life and the fact that we're living longer will affect this for us in the future. I think the second last point I have on the slide says that at the age of 65, there's a 50% chance that one of your partners, if you have a partner, will live past the age of 90, right? And the majority of people, let's say they retire at 75 or 80, or let's say like 65 ideally, right? But how will they live after the age of 65 for 25 years, right? Or 20 years? If they don't have a proper budget or retirement savings, it becomes extremely difficult. So what is a budget, right? And I think most of us have an idea of what a budget is, but it is a breakdown of how much you expect to earn and how much you expect to spend in a specific given amount of time. And your budget, when you create a budget and you have it all laid out nicely, should really represent who you, like what you're doing today and what you expect to be spending or making in the next couple of months. The 5 most important components of a budget always comes down to your after-tax income. So how much money you take home, basically. Your fixed expenses, which is expenses that are the same amount every single month that are harder to break. An example might be rents or a phone contract, or even something like a Netflix subscription, right? It's the same amount every single month. Your variable expenses are expenses that will change and fluctuate. So like groceries, maybe gas. Then we have emergency funds and savings. So we'll talk a little bit more about emergency funds because this is where I think a lot of us maybe need to focus a little bit more. But it's getting trickier as cost of living is going up. So an emergency fund, if I can summarize it quickly, is basically a smaller savings account where you're hoping it's not going to be making any interest for you. It's just there in case something goes wrong. For example, if you were to lose your job or you were to get sick, do you have money saved apart that can cover your expenses for the next 3 months, 6 months, and sometimes a year? Depending on who you are and how risk averse you are, your emergency fund might cover something like 6 months, let's say, if you're really like, I need something to cover me, as opposed to somebody who can say, oh, if I lose a job, maybe I can find one quickly. Their emergency fund might be smaller. I would recommend usually 3 months should be the minimum that you should have. But again, it is getting more difficult with cost of living going up. But having a proper budget can help set aside money for emergency funds. And once you have an emergency fund that can cover an emergency for 3 months, 6 months, then that disposable income that you make can be put into investing. They can be put into maybe saving for a vacation. You decide what you do, but we'll get more into that as we go on. One thing I would recommend when you are doing your budget is you use the square method like I showed here in the presentation, where on one side you have fixed essentials, variable essentials, fixed non-essentials, and variable non-essentials. So this would be different depending on who you are and what your situation is. For example, most students would need rents, utilities, food bill as something that's essential and something that is fixed. And then variable essentials would be like your food, for sure you need to eat. If you drive a car and you have to go to work or school, your gas would be a variable essential, or some sort of transportation. And your debt, if you have credit card, something you have to pay off. The bottom side of the square are things that, since they're non-essential, if you really are in a crunch, you can probably eliminate them. But there are things that maybe you want, right? Like the gym, going shopping for clothes, or eating out. Before moving forward, I think it's important to really emphasize that when you are creating your budget or you're managing your money, it is really a relationship between you and money. And the idea of who you are as a person shouldn't suffer extremely, if that makes sense. Like if you like going out and you like enjoying your time with friends, going out to eat at restaurants, it's still something that you should do. It's just understanding when you can do it and how often you can do it. When I helped people in the past with budgets, I think there was an extreme case where people would want to cut everything off, and they would try for maybe a couple of weeks and they would suffer either socially or emotionally because they're not finding enjoyment with what they did in their lives. So it's more about finding balance, right? And having a square method maybe can help put that out there if you have it visually. So as I mentioned before, half of Canadians don't have budgets, right? And I don't think we want to be there. I think you want to have at least an understanding of how much you're making and how much you're spending, and if you should at least cut back on spending or make more money. But a budget, again, is just a snapshot of what you're spending on currently and what's going to be spending in the next 3 months. It's not who you are as a person, and it shouldn't dictate kind of your financial health for the rest of your life, right? It's just an idea of where you're at right now and how you can pivot to become, a little bit more sustainable. We're going to move on because we've already talked about this here. And we're going to give an example of a budget. So this is just a general example. Maybe this is for somebody who has already graduated and has a job. Because as you can see, the take-home pay here is $4,000. Maybe they work at a bank, and they might have a side hustle of maybe selling cookies where they make $500 a month. But the idea here is that they're making $4,500 a month as income, right? Then we go into the breakdown of fixed expenses and variable expenses. For this person in particular, they have rent, phone bill, internet, and gym as fixed expenses. And then they might have credit card debt, groceries, entertainment, transportations. But the idea here is that once you calculate all the expenses before savings, they have spent $3,780, and their disposable income, which we mentioned before, is $720. So this disposable income is key to your emergency fund, your savings, and your investing, right? If you don't have a disposable income, you can't put money aside for emergency funds or short-term savings, or even the idea of investing into mutual funds or an idea like crypto. That money, and we'll get more into it as we go into credit, but you cannot look into that side of, I guess, finances until you're stable with at least a more comfortable disposable income. Again, this person here has $720 a month. So if they wanted to break down $420 a month to an emergency fund until they reach, let's say, $15,000 in there that they're comfortable with, then they can start investing more heavily into their short-term savings accounts or long-term savings account. But again, this is just an example of what a budget might look like. It shouldn't reflect where you're at right now. And realistically, these things will change as the months go on. Here is a budget I made with somebody who has different personalities and different goals, right? Because you got to remember, the idea of your money is that you want to use it to support something that you like, or maybe an aspiration you have in the future. You shouldn't be making money just to save it somewhere and look at it, right? That there's no use to that. But it should be more about maybe getting something down the road, maybe a house, maybe spending on a vacation. Whatever that is, it really does depend on who you are and what situation you're in, again. So Simone's example here is that Simone makes $5,000 a month from their job, and then a side hustle of $100. But Simone also spends a lot of money, right? So at the end of the month, they spend $5,050. They only have a disposable income of $50, right? And for somebody who's making $5,000 a month, hopefully you're able to save a little bit more money than just $50 a month. But that's when we can look at what are things that Simone can do. If Simone's goal is to save money for a vacation and paying off debt, they really have to look at their expenses and be like, okay, what are things I can cut back on? Maybe rent can be cut back if they can find a cheaper place, right? Maybe the idea of entertainment, you don't want to be spending $700 a month on entertainment, and your credit card is also $600 a month, right? So when you're able to break down a budget and understand what your goals are in the future, it becomes a lot easier to plan. But one key idea here for Simone is the idea of not feeling stressed about money. So that could be good and bad, right? If you're the type of person who won't be affected by fluctuating numbers, for example, if you're able to tolerate more risk, and you have more of a savings, you can play around a little bit more with your money into different types of investments. But if you're somebody who's risk averse, for example, if Simone was really stressed about where they're at with their money, we would have to make changes pretty quickly, right? And say, okay, we have to cut back on credit card debt. Your rent is too high, cut back on entertainment, whatever you can cut back on so that they can feel a little bit more comfortable with how much money is left over. The key here, as I mentioned before, is that if you want to take back more money or have more disposable income, you have two options, right? And the saying we have is you either raise the roof or you lower the floor. By raising the roof, Simone has to make more money somehow. Maybe she gets a pay raise, or the side hustle becomes better, or she saves more money by lowering the floor, right? So another example budget we have here is something that I work with my with the partners that work on my project right now. They have yearly budgets, right? And I remember when I was in university, when I was using OSAP, I would get a lump sum of money every semester or even sometimes once a year, either through grants or like OSAP funding. And depending if I had a job or not, I would really have to manage that fund for the next 3 months or next 12 months, right? So if you're in a situation where you're basically relying off OSAP or grant money, it would be better if you broke down your budget by a yearly basis, so 12 months, or by a quarterly basis, like every 4 months, every 3 months, however often you get your funding in. It's especially key if you don't have a job, right? So if you're not working a part-time job and you're not getting any other source of income coming through, you really have to plan out for the year and understand if your rent is going to be for the full year, how much is that going to be? How much is your phone bill going to be for the next year? Your internet and subscription, again, what are your fixed expenses for the next year? Plan that out, and then after you have your fixed expenses, you will understand how much money you have left over for variable expenses, right? So your groceries, your eating out, and this goes back to the chart of the square method, right? Of understanding what is going to be essential for you and what is non-essential. So in the example we have here, example number 2, I was speaking with some university students a couple weeks ago, and we broke down a budget for the year. So this person got grant money for the year, and after the money was used to pay off their classes, they were left with $16,000 for the year. And this person did not want to work; they wanted to focus on academia. So the goal was no work, just focus on schooling and live off the 16,000 that's left over. We broke it down, right? We broke down how much the rent was going to be, the other essentials that are variable, like groceries. We put eating out because that was essential for them, and transportation was essential for them too, to get around the city. And what it turned out was that they were going to be negative by $3,520 if they were very strict with their budget. And that's just not sustainable. So the reality was in this example is even if you plan a budget and you try to get some goals, sometimes reality hits in and you have to get a second job, or you have to either spend a little bit less money in rent. But it's not a bad thing. It's just more of being able to be prepared for getting a part-time job or for making some changes in lifestyles. So we broke it down and we saw that Sam realistically would need to make 3,520 more a year. And if you break that down per month, it's 294. If minimum wage is 16.55, how much hours is that per week? So it comes out to, well, they'd have to work maybe 20 hours, 25 hours a month, right? So it is, when you break it down like that, if you work 15 hours a week, they would have enough money to be able to live with the $16,000 initial investment there. But this might be something that you might find yourself in, right? If you don't have a job and you have a lump sum of money coming through, it might be better to break down what you expect to spend for the year, really focusing on the fixed expenses that are essential and the variable expenses that are essential, and then see where you can maybe shave off some money. Maybe get a cheaper phone plan, maybe cheaper rent if you can find it, or maybe cut back on subscriptions if you don't need Netflix, Disney, and Spotify, right? But basically, when you have your budget down and you're comfortable with your disposable income, we can talk a little bit more about time and money, right? The idea of credit, the idea of investing, right? And the question I like to ask is, what is the value of time and money, right? Would you like $1 today or $1 tomorrow, right? And again, there's no right or wrong for this. It really does depend what you do with that dollar, right? One thing I will say, and this is true, I guess, throughout history here, is that if you have $1 today and you just leave it, let's say you have $100 and you put it under your pillow and you take it out again next year, though that $100 is worth less, right? Because of inflation and the cost of living rising, what you could buy with $100 today, you won't be able to buy with $100 next year, right? It might go down to 95, right? So time and money really do play a critical role, right? If you have disposable income and you're able to save, it's a good idea to start maybe researching into investing and different types of avenues of investing. Um, the key here, and I think we've heard this all before, is the idea of compounding interest, right? And it can work against you, it can work for you. If you're not careful with your credit cards or your loans, it definitely works against you. But if you're able to leverage it, it's a really, really powerful tool for future, I guess, stability. So here's just an example of compounding interest, right? If you have $100 in the bank at a 6% interest rate and you keep it there for 2 years, right? What happens? After the first year, you will get $106, right? Because you multiply it by 1.06. And after 2 years, that 6% compounds on the $106. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go quickly to an example here from a website. Just give me 1 second. And so this is the website I had there on the slide. But you can play around with this. Again, it's not going to be completely accurate because some banks take away, they take a percentage if you go with banks. You really have to do your research, but this is just a quick example of how compounding interest works. So let's say you put an initial investment of $500, right? And you add, let's say you add $200 a month. And let's say you find a mutual fund or you find some sort of option that gives you something higher than the inflation rate. So let's say this is a nice one, but let's say like 8%, right? Which is not crazy, but they're not that rare, but they're not very, very common anymore. But let's say it compounds monthly and you keep it in there for 10 years. So the idea is that over the next 10 years, you are putting in $200 a month from your monthly pay into this account. How much will that grow in 10 years based on the interest rate, right? And again, the key here with any money that goes into investment, and maybe it'll help you depending on your personality, is that it's money that you don't need, right? If you need this money for rent or for any essentials, you can't put it into investments because essentially investing is a little bit like gambling, right? There's no guarantee that it's going to go up 8%, right? Markets might crash. And if you need that money at any point, you have to take it out, which defeats the purpose of keeping it in there for long. So again, any money that you put into investing is money that you don't need right now. You've covered your essentials, your budget is fine, your debt is okay, right? Then you can start maybe thinking about investing. But if we calculate it over 10 years, and so the idea here is that over the next 10 years, you will have $37,000 saved up, and the total amount of interest earned is $13,200, right? So that's $13,200 that you did not put in. That's the money that was made off the interest rates, right? And the idea is that the longer you keep this inside, the more money you'll make, right? So if we use this here, this number, $37,000, and let's say you put that back in there, but now you have more money. Let me just put 37,000. Let's say you have more disposable income, and you're like, I want to put $500 a month instead. And let's say the interest rate stays the same, but now you're going to keep it in there for 15 years because you're just going to use this as a vessel for long-term retirements, let's say, right? How much money would you make? So off that $37,000 that you made, and you're putting in $500 a month, what ends up happening is At the end of 15 years, you will have almost $300,000 saved up, and more than half of that is off investment, right? Off the interest rates that go in. So you only put in around $150,000, right? Almost $170,000 was created for you. And again, this is very nice, like ideal situation. So it won't always look like this. But the idea is that if you invest over time and you're consistent with it, again, it's not money that you need. You'll have 10, 15 years down the road, a lot of money saved up. So we will go back to the presentation. And so that's the idea of compounding interest when it works for you. But it also works against you, right? If you have credit cards or a line of credit or a loan for a car, there is going to be interest rate charged against you. And whenever you decide to borrow money, because I think it happens almost inevitably, right? If you have a credit card or if you have to borrow money for big accounts, you should ask yourself these questions, right? How much money are you able to borrow? How easily can you borrow the money? And what's the cost to borrow the money, right? Those three things are key. And then after that, it's when do you need to repay them and how often do you need to repay them? But again, the idea of credit cards, and I'm sure many of you have one already and already understand how it works, but they're really good if you know how to use them, right? We live in a society where a lot of our future investments are based off your credit score. And the best way to I guess, earn a good credit score is with using your credit cards and being able to pay it off consistently. It's also much safer to use than a debit card. You have usually insurance with credit cards, so another benefit of it. And here's just a quick idea of a credit card statement if you don't know how to read it. We'll go through it quickly because I just don't want to spend too much more time on this. But on the left-hand side, you have your balance statement, basically all the things that you spent on in the past month. On the right-hand side, you have at the top the minimum payment that you have to pay before the credit cards charge you, or you default on payment, basically. They'll always charge you interest if you don't pay it off at zero. The second square on the right-hand side basically tells you what your interest rate is. So that's how much they charge you based on the balance that's left. And at the bottom, it tells you how much your new balance is, how much is left to pay off so your credit card stays at zero. These are the four, I'd say, key parts of it. The transaction history is really important for you to know how your spending habits are. And then your new balance is also important to know how much you have left. And then finally, I do want to talk a little bit about OSAP because maybe some students are getting near the end of their 4 years, 5 years, and will have to start repaying OSAP if they have loans. First things first, do never ever share your personal information for OSAP. And there's a lot of scams when I was working last year with a lot of international students. There were a lot of scams that would come through OSAP, right? And unfortunately, a couple of them did fall for them. So you got to remember that OSAP won't ask you for repayments. It will be the National Student Loan Service Center, the NSLSC is what will be reaching out for repayments. And you do have a grace period of 6 months to pay back your OSAP, to start repaying basically. So you won't get charged interest on the Ontario portion of it, but you do have a federal portion that will start accumulating interest. So it's better to pay it back as soon as possible. But again, you have 6 months grace period before you need to start paying back. And at the end, basically, the NSLSC will send you a package before you start paying back your OSAP. So wait for that package to come through. If it doesn't come through within the first 6 months of finishing your degree, you should give them a call, right? And just make sure that they're sending it to your location. But what if you can't pay back your loan right away, right? Do you have options? And of course you do. You always have options, and you should make sure to use them if you need to use them. But if after the 6 month grace period you can't pay back or you're having trouble to pay back, through the portal of the NSLCS, the National Student Loan Service Center, there is an option for the repayment assistance program. Okay, so you have to click that and you have to basically put in the information. They'll ask you for your income, the family size, like how many people live in your house, and how much is left on your loan. And based on that, they will either reduce the amount of payment you have to do, or they will just stop interest for the next couple of months. The thing is, you do have to reapply every 6 months to make sure you're on track, but it's a really good option if you can't pay back. And then finally, at the end, and I think it's an important point here, is where can you get more money, right? Like, how can you get more money at the end of the year or at the beginning of the year? And honestly, I would say you should do your taxes if you're not doing your taxes. Last year when I was helping with the tax season, and the year before that also, there are a lot of people who don't put in their tax information at the end of April, right? And sometimes they think it's because they don't make money, so they don't have to declare, or they don't want to owe money if they make little money for that year. But if you're somebody who is a student or who is, let's say, considered under the poverty line, which a lot of students are because they're not making money, there are a lot of benefits out there that are untapped, right? I think last year we were sitting at over $2 billion of funding just sitting there that's supposed to be used for us because we were the taxpayers. But we don't access them because we're not putting in our taxes, right? One of the tools I would really recommend that you can show your family and you can use it yourself is called the Benefit Wayfinder tool. It's completely free. It's made by Prosper Canada, and I will show it quickly at the end. But if you're having trouble and you don't know where to start with taxes, you also have the option to do free tax clinics. Look one up in your area. You usually have to just sign up or do a call, and they'll put you in for a time slot, and they'll help you do your taxes, right? They're volunteers. They'll do it for free as long as you're under like $50,000 a year. And it's a really good option to just get your taxes going, right? So sometimes with taxes, I know last year I helped 2 students get back almost $2,000 in rebates, which was really helpful for them, right? And it was money that's theirs. If you're a student who is trying to get PR or citizenship, for example, doing your taxes really helps because it shows that you're consistently, trying to do your due diligence for, I guess, the Canadian society. But it really does help with your track record for maybe future PR or citizenship. So before we end the presentation, I will just show the Wayfinder tool really quickly, just so you know. Give me 1 second. So this is the Benefit Wayfinder tool. You put in Benefit Wayfinder in Google, it should be the first link. And it's just 7 questions that they ask you. So you select Ontario, and then they ask you the questions here. Are you up to date with your taxes? You can say yes or no. You put your age group. So let's say you're between the ages of 21 and 24. You put your status here. I'm going to put, choose the first one. And then you can pick that you're a student and you're employed part-time, whatever fits you, right? Press next. You put in how much income you make. So let's say a student will make between 15 and 25. And how many people live in your home. Any children under the age of 18, you can say yes or no. So you just answer these questions, right? And at the end of it, what it does is it gives you a dashboard of all the rebates that you are qualified for, right? It doesn't mean that you will get them all, but it means that you can apply for them all. And you can download this dashboard, you can print them out and take it to, let's say, someone who helps you with your taxes. And you can say to them, can we please apply for these? And they will apply for you, right? Some of them, honestly, you just have to fill your taxes and it's given to you automatically. But this is a really useful tool if you don't know what to apply for, because there's over 400 different benefits across Canada, right? So having a tool like this is really useful that you can share with your family. And at the end of the year, if you just want to see what you're eligible for, print that out, bring it to someone who helps you with your taxes, and hopefully you can get more of a rebate.